All right, well, thank you. Welcome, everyone, and thanks so much for coming to Tapestry. My name is Haley, and I am one of the hosts of Tapestry, put on by a group of us with the Tapestry team. I'm going to introduce those first. We have Charles Chassin on the graphics and the cubes and the keeping stuff together. We got Nikki Barnes on the gumbo and the hosting and the table setting. Then we got David Morrow in the back with the checks and the spreadsheets and keeping us all in order and stuff. Always awesome. Yeah. And then we also have the NUNUs team. So thank you to Peg and George for keeping things going and letting us do this project. Woo! David. So Louisiana Tapestries is funded by the Louisiana Endowment for Humanities. So thanks again to Chris Robert and that team for funding us this project. It's a series of 5 conversations about culture and language and people in Louisiana. We were using the metaphor of a tapestry. And I say this every time, but if you look on the Wikipedia of what a tapestry is, we really like the definition. It's in progress, usually. It's made to create pictures or images out of woven cloth rather than patterns. So in tapestries, we're not looking to connect things together, but we're looking to give a good illustration of a particular place and image in time in Louisiana culture. The other thing about a tapestry is that it's fragile. It's made of all of these delicate threads, and some come to the surface and some emerge and some go down, and they weave together to create what we see as an image. And I think about that when we think about Louisiana culture and how many cultures come together to create what we are here in Louisiana. So this is the 5th and final tapestry installment. We'll have Charles at the end give a little plug about our next series, which will be about architecture. This series about culture, the next table series about architecture. So we hope you join us in the summertime for that one. But again, thank you guys all for coming. I believe you guys found the gumbo. If you haven't, there is gumbo. There's also bathrooms if you need a bathroom. So yeah, and with that, I'd like to introduce our final guest, Taalibe Auguste. So Taalibe, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself? And we do this with the spoon as part of the project. So hold the spoon for people to hear you.
Okay. Well, first I can say thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I missed the last 4, but I guess I get to do a 5th one. About me, I'm from Bellevue, Louisiana, but also Kreyol, Louisiana. So I grew up in between both Bellevue and Kreyol, as my dad's side is from Bellevue, whereas my mom's side is from Baton Rouge, and we ended up just moving to Kreyol because of school system. I am currently the president of Kreyol Inc. I just became president about a couple of days ago, actually, Sunday, last Sunday. And I am a French and Creole speaker of Louisiana. I pride myself in being both of those. Just doing this work is something that very much inspires me to continue going. And so that's me. That's me, Taalibe.
Thanks. And the first thing that I'm thinking of is, as we're thinking about the guests who came today, you're definitely the youngest. How did you get to the point of doing language activism, or what made you want to be engaged with that? And why'd you start?
What?
Of the people we've interviewed so far, in the 5 people, out of 5 people.
Well, I'm 22, so I don't know if that's young. Well, I would say for me, I actually started getting into language activism when I was 16. So I was in a French class at Dutchtown High, and I had a teacher. This teacher, she was a Smith from St. Martinville, and we started talking about French and stuff like that. And the way that I was talking, she was like, "Oh my God, you talk just like my father." And so then I'll say something, she'd be like, "Yep, that's how my father said it, but we say it this way in France." And I was like, "Oh, okay." But it really struck me one day when she said, "Well, you can actually do stuff with your French. Like there's people that speak just like you. There's folks that want to continue things going." I'm like, that's not true. you're lying to me. Like, there's nobody my age who's really doing stuff. Nobody. And then that's when she showed me Tele Louisiana. And she showed me a couple interviews. It had Jordan Thibodeau, it had Jonathan Myers, you had Rachel Daughtery, you had all these folks, and they were all young, speaking French, doing things. I was like, okay, maybe I can get myself involved in this stuff. And it actually took one day. I was online, I was just writing stuff in Creole, and a man by the name of Michael Gisclair ended up finding me. Now, Michael Gisclair, he's from down the bayou. If I'm not mistaken, I think he's from Duloc. Yeah, he's from Duloc, if I'm not mistaken. And so he started connecting me to all these different people. That's how I got connected to Jonathan Myers. And then from Jonathan Myers, I got connected to Louisiana. So that's when I really started to do language activism.
And when you say language activism, what is that for you?
Well, for me, language activism is about actually trying to advocate for the language, the use of the language in the community. And in the case of us here in Louisiana, which French and Creole, since our language is basically in a state of regression, about trying to progress that language back into said community. So folks who don't speak, get them to speak again. Folks who are afraid of speaking, get them to speak in the public again, and just have pride in that language.
How do you feel? What are the actions that you feel like you do to make those things happen?
I'll say just presence. Just being present, just being actually not afraid to speak in Creole and French. For instance, most of my friends who speak to me, they know that I don't ever really speak English to them. They don't ever hear me speak English. They actually don't recognize my voice in English. Being out in the public and just speaking the language is one way of just being present. It allows folks to be like, oh my God, I've heard that before. It's interesting to have a young person speaking this again. In the past, I used to do a lot of videos. I did what was called La Kreyol Show, which was like a series where I interviewed folks who spoke French and Creole about different topics in Louisiana. And most of the folks that I interviewed were all younger. And that was, I think, was something that was really not game changing, but it was like mind boggling a little bit because you're like, think about Louisiana, you think about older folks who speak French. You don't really think about younger folks who are now speaking French still to this day.
Now, you spoke earlier that you say that you speak French and Creole. And when I'm hearing you talk today about your journey, I'm hearing a lot. Well, I'm hearing you say the word French a lot. Can you talk about how, do you have a definition between the two, or do you find that it's more fluid?
Well, there's definitely a definition between the two. For instance, the way I do the definition between the two is the way that the grammar is set up. So since they're two separate languages, however, they're languages that are closely related, which is why some folks who are in, say, Arnaudville or in Hongro, if they are a French speaker and they listen to Creole, they understand it. But it's not the same case for somebody who's from, say, Pointe-aux-Chien. When they listen to Creole, they will not understand it. So for me, defining the two is about how you actually speak said language. If you're a Creole speaker, you speak Moganli, tu pas Créole, tu connais comment dire pas Créole. Et si tu pas français, tu pas français, tu connais comment parler le français, tu peux parler le français avec tout le monde. So that's how me, I actually like define Creole and French.
I know as someone who works with language often, there's a story that you hear a lot, particularly from older people who, when they're hearing young people speak, they immediately think about how they've lost the language and how much it means to them that you're speaking it in there. Do you feel pressure around that? Or how does it feel when people come to you with these feelings of what they've gone through now that they're seeing you speak the language?
For me, it's more of like, okay, when somebody who is older comes to me and says that they were beaten at school or says that their parents were beaten at school, I'm like, oh, wow, this is like more like gratification of the fact that I still speak these languages. It's like gratifying. It's like, hey, we didn't necessarily lose it. It's not gone. It's still there. You just have to reacquire it. You have to retake it up. And so for me, it gives me more of an inspiration to continue speaking it and don't stop speaking it.
What do you think that there's a lot of crossover spaces when you're thinking, because you mentioned that most of the people that you interview or you talk to are younger. And I know that there's also places where there's a lot of, like I'm thinking about Top Français or Top Creoles, where people are getting together, generally an older generation, to speak. Are there a lot of crossover events between generations?
Yes and no. There's not enough. There's some, for instance, you have the Zydeco's, or you have the jams, the Lala jams that we have over at Feed and Seed, or you have um like the French tables. But there's really not enough. The younger generation and the older generation, it's like a disconnect between the two. When an older person talks about French, the way they talk about French is more of, it's like sadness. There's a lot of sadness in it, especially if that person has been through some experiences. When a younger person talks about French, it's more happiness. It's more, I'm speaking this language. I'm a Louisianiase. I'm a francophone, stuff like that. So there's not enough space between the two.
And I want to ask questions about, because I know that you've just become the president of Kreyol Inc. And so I have a lot of questions for you about that. But I also want to wonder, I just texted you to be here, thinking about what hats are you wearing in this space? Are you sitting here as the president of Kreyol Inc.? Are you sitting here as Taalibe? Or, what are the other hats that you're bringing in today?
I'm coming as the child that my mom birthed. So I'm coming as Taalibe. But what I'll say is that even though I wear all these different hats, the person within those hats doesn't necessarily change. It's the same person, same ideas, same way of speaking. It's the same motivation. Nothing changes when I wear the hat of Kreyol Inc. or when I wear the hat of, say, my unit in the military. Nothing truly changes.
So when you're thinking about how long is your term as the president of Kreyol Inc. And what visions do you have going forward? Is it be a whole craziness, or what? Are there things that are changing? Are there things that you want to see happen, or what are the dreams around that?
I think for us, it's 2 years as president. I get confused sometimes. So Kreyol Inc. has always had this mission of educating the community, being in the community, language enrichment, but also making sure that the community develops. And so that mission is not going to divert under my leadership, but there's going to be more things. So, for instance, we have Le Rassemblement de la Jeunesse Louisianaise that's going in April. We have the
Here?
It's going to be in Lafayette during festivals, like during Festival International. We have the fact that we're doing more of this educational series online on social media. That lady that you see right there, Lowly, she's like one of the main stars of that series where she's speaking in Creole. And we're trying to find a way to bridge a gap between not only our community, the Creole community, but also the new folks in Louisiana or the other communities in Louisiana that we don't necessarily associate with all the time.
You give an example.
Like the Hispanic community. So you have a lot of Hispanics that have been here, and some for a long time. So you have, for instance, the Hondurans who've been in New Orleans for about 100 years, and a lot of them don't necessarily know about Creole culture. And you have the Hispanics of Lafayette. Some of them know about Creole culture, and some of them do not. And so it's about trying to bridge that gap. Say, hey, we are somewhat like y'all. You are somewhat like us. Together, we actually be a little bit better.
You mentioned earlier a term, Louisianaise, and that's different than the terms French or Creole or Hispanic. Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by that term?
So Louisianaise is just somebody from Louisiana. Somebody who's born, raised here, grew up in a culture that is a Louisianaise. Now, that term is from French, because when you talk about yourself in French, je suis Louisianais, je suis Louisianais, I'm Louisiana. But for me, to use Louisianais in English signifies that you do come from this Francophone background, you come from this unique culture. And so, I guess the way I define Louisianais is it's in a newer sense of you don't necessarily have to be Creole or Cajun. You could be a random French immersion school kid or a random person here in Louisiana that has no roots in Creole or Cajun, but you're Louisianais.
So this is the point where I had a question. This is like real talk on the couch here. I think it's important for us to have that definition of someone who is ingrained in the cultural heritage of Louisiana and is here. And I think Louisianaise gets really close to that. But I'm thinking about other communities that we've interviewed within the Tapestry project and the other communities that are doing language work here. Thinking about, is that French core the main core that we should still be digging from when we think about rooting ourselves in Louisiana?
It's kind of interesting to be passive.
Yeah, it's part of the game, right?
So for me, it's not necessarily about the French core. It's about the fact that, and I talk to my friends about this all the time, it's the fact that creolization doesn't stop. It's a process that's never stopped. It's a process that's been here since the beginning of Louisiana and continues to be here to this day. For instance, when we think about gumbo, you're not thinking about something that's a melting pot. It's not a melting pot. You have rice, which is African. You have a lot of this, you have a lot of the, like the root, which is more of a European thing. It all comes together to make this gumbo. So, for instance, you had, what's his name? He's from New Iberia.
Fanat.
Yeah, you had him. Now, there's many Laotians in New Iberia, many Laotians around Southwest Louisiana. They have added things into the culture. They're not necessarily French speakers, they're not necessarily Creole speakers, but they've added things a lot into the culture. And so when I think about creolization, I think about this term of you're adding things. You're not necessarily making things one. You're not necessarily assimilating into one, like American culture, but you're adding things into this idea of Louisiana.
Gotcha. You said something a little bit different there, and I want to give you a chance to define it. You said creolization versus Kreyol. Could you give us a definition of what creolization is to you?
So creolization is the fact creolization is when you bring a couple communities together that are either not linguistically the same, either not genetically the same, they're not the same ethnicities. They all come together into this one community and they share different things between each other. And so that's creolization.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm thinking about how creolization, like the definition of a Creole language and then the definition of a Creole community and how sometimes that feels different or separated. But I like the definition. I really appreciate the definition that you just gave.
Well, when you think about the definition for a Creole Creole languages are all usually brought up from the fact that you have one culture that dominates over the other culture. However, in the Creole languages, these languages are so mixed to where they have aspects from all these different parts. Louisiana Creole itself has aspects from Native Americans, such as the Homa, the Choctaw, the Chitimacha. It has aspects from the Spanish, such as the word calabus. It has aspects from Africa. So you have Wanga, Singo or Sango. You have Uki, and then you have a bunch of European aspects too. And all these, and even you have American aspects. You have stuff that came from the English language that is in Creole. So Creole itself is tied to that creolization.
When we're thinking about like, where is this going? When I think about the way that you just described Creole, I think of it as a swirling gumbo where you have these pieces that are coming together. You know, you have the sausage colliding with the green onions, you know, and just kind of making this pool together. But as we're thinking, I'm just going to call you the next generation. Sitting here with a hurt knee and a broken arm, like you're gonna make it further. Where would it be a delight for you to see cultural Louisianaise going?
Could you restate that question?
Sure, yeah. You know, you were a language activist. You're someone who is a leader. You're someone who is moving Louisianaise culture forward in a direction. And part of that is your vision of how these things are coming together. And I was really struck with the way that you said creolization isn't an ended process. It's something that's continuously going forward. So as someone who is the person who is, you know, taking a role in making this gumbo, where do you vision, or where do you want to see things going, or where are you hoping that by the end of your life, language, culture, Louisianaise has gotten to what point to you?
Well, I'll say for me, by the end of my life, I'll hopefully be able to see a bunch of folks who can walk around, speak Creole, speak Spanish, speak French freely around anywhere here in the state of Louisiana, go to a store, be able to buy their things in French, Creole, or Spanish, or even Vietnamese if they want to. Have schools that the schools are not one language, the schools are multiple languages. Instead of just French immersion schools, combine those French immersion schools with Spanish immersion. Allow the kids to have a multilingual education that's not just bilingual. So for me, when I think of how Louisiana is going to go and how Louisiana is going to continue, I think of the fact that we're going to start to, what's the word, emphasize our uniqueness more than emphasizing what makes us the same as somebody from Mississippi.
When I'm thinking about it, that made me, your comment there made me think about what if we didn't separate those languages? You know, what if the process of creolization continued and Uma language revitalization, French language revitalization, or even new language revitalization, existing Croatian, Vietnamese, and we stopped thinking about them as individual languages and thought about them as like a palette of communication. I don't know. That wasn't a question. That was just a comment. Sorry, man.
I mean, what you see a lot, what you see, for instance, here in the Louisiana French and Louisiana Creole revitalization movement, is that one can't exist without the other. And I would say that goes for all language revitalization projects in the state. One really can't exist without the other. And that's when you do go back to French. The French revitalization movement has allowed for Creole revitalization movement to move forward. However, there's many people and there's many things that unfortunately stop the Creole revitalization movement from moving forward due to their biases, due to their thoughts of what Creole language is supposed to be. And Creole language revitalization movement actually can allow for the Native American languages revitalization movement, allow for the Vietnamese revitalization movement, but also Spanish revitalization. As a lot of folks here, especially in Southwest, forget that Louisiana has 3 different dialects of Spanish that were historically spoken here. You have the Islanos, you have the Adeseños, you have the Rulis. Those are all important to Louisiana Tapestry.
I agree, and I just want to amend and say that it wasn't just the French revitalization movement that supported some of these language movements. I think that there's a very strong indigenous language movement across North America, and there's a lot of tribal support for language work that that takes a different shape than French language revitalization. So it's like I agree with most of what you said, but I think that that's another very strong vein of power that's coming through and is available in Louisiana along with French. Just plug that for a second. When you're thinking about your vision, and I think I agree, I definitely agree. Thank you for saying about how connected all of this work is. And when I'm thinking about your vision forward for the future and where we are now, if language work is connected, what are the things that language work should be going towards or trying to change to get to your vision? What's our path there?
Education and economy. Those 2 are one of the main 2 here in Louisiana when it comes to anything. Education-wise, we already have 42 different French immersion schools. I don't know the number for Spanish immersion schools, but I know they're a little bit less. We have Mandarin, even though I argue we should have Vietnamese over Mandarin, Laotian over Mandarin. Having more of those schools where, for instance, if you go to Luxembourg, kids, they learn French, they learn math, They learn literature in French for about 4 years, then they switch, and then they learn it in, say, German, and then they switch again and learn it in Luxembourgish. Why can't we mimic that same system here, where they learn certain subjects in French, learn different subjects in Spanish, then switch those subjects, and then they learn it in the different languages as well. They can speak English all the time. There's English everywhere. It's never going anywhere, unfortunately. But then you also have the economy. So the biggest problem here in Louisiana is that we promote French a lot. We promote the fact that we are able to speak French, but when French speakers come, they don't hear it. They don't hear it in New Orleans. They sometimes don't even hear it in Lafayette. They don't hear it in Baton Rouge. And so they're left with the fact that, okay, there's really nobody who speaks French. So then they go back home and they tell everybody nobody speaks French in Louisiana. And that actually does kind of hit us a little bit when it comes to the money side. I work at Lower Plantation, which is in Vacherie, Louisiana, and we have 3 French tours a day. Now, those tours are usually always packed. However, we hear the same thing over and over again. I went all across the state and I never heard anybody who spoke French. You're the first French speaker that I've talked to. And it's like, okay, how is that hurting us economically? When we have all these folks who are coming here, they're coming here for tourism reasons, and they don't have any resources. Folks that they thought they were going to be able to speak to, they can't speak to. And so that also hits us a little bit on the education side, because there's some folks who come here, like from France, they come here and they want to go to school at UL, or they want to go to school at LSU because they think it's a French-speaking state. Well, they come to LSU and they realize they can't speak French. They must speak English, and their teachers, even though the teachers might speak French if they're from France, they only teach in English. So it's those aspects that we have to look at a little bit more to actually develop this idea of Louisianiase.
Are there other economic benefits to additive bilingualism outside of tourism?
Oh yeah. You have the astronomical industry, you have the plant industry, you have the aeronautical industry, you even have the maritime industry. A lot of those industries, you have to be multilingual to really be in them. We are getting beat badly in Louisiana by places like Mississippi, Arkansas, Texas, where these French companies, these Belgian companies, or any company outside of here, they're moving to Austin, they're moving to Arkansas, they're moving to Mississippi, because they know that they can, actually build a good what's the word? Baptiste.
Social structure.
Yeah, we'll go with that social structure. They could build a good social structure, and there, economically, it's a little bit better for them. It's sustainable. Whereas over here, it's really not. So flexing our linguistic ability might actually allow us to change their minds to actually build over here, which might help us increase jobs.
So what I'm hearing is that there's this French underground. It's not, maybe that's not large, but when I'm thinking about like the punk scene in urban environments, it's like there's this underground French scene in Louisiana where you have all of these youths who can speak but aren't speaking. Do you think that's a accurate assumption, or?
That's very accurate, actually. It's really accurate. You would not imagine how many folks that I find on Hinge, the dating app, that these folks actually do speak French. Like a lot of Louisianians, like young Louisianians, are going to say lycée français, they're learning French in school. They speak French, but they just don't. They just don't speak in public. They don't. And so you have this underground that's like they have the ability to do so, but they have no incentive to do so.
Do they, so that's an interesting, there's no incentive to do so. Is there a de-incentive, or is there a reason, is there pressure for them not to?
I would say no, there's not a pressure for them not to speak, but since there's no incentive to speak, what's the point? If you can live your life in English, why do you want to switch language? So unless we get an incentive, and incentive will be something that's more exclusive, not inclusive, then what's the point? What's the purpose of switching to French?
So I want to make sure we're also having time for this very quiet crowd, which usually means that there's questions coming up. And so, our conversation points. So I want to give time to make sure we have time to have the discussion. But my last question is thinking about what does support look like? So I am not a member of the French Underground Youth Connection, I would say, but I know that they're there and I want to help them. What does help look like from someone like me? Doesn't speak very much.
That's a little bit hard because, in my opinion, I think you need to be able to speak a little bit more in order to help out more. So, but there's things you can do, such as create like more of an environment to allow them to come and feel comfortable to speak whatever type of French that they can, or whatever language that they can, where they're not necessarily judged. Here in Louisiana, we have a problem where we're not only judged by French folks, but sometimes we're judged by other Louisianians for the way that we speak. And so these younger folks, they're like, oh, wow, I learned my French in school, but whenever I go to speak with this older person, they tell me, wow, it's good that you speak French, however, you don't speak like I do. And then they don't necessarily talk to me. But then if I speak to somebody from France, they say, oh, you have an accent. It sounds very much not French. And so then they don't talk to them. So just being able to actually be more open, allow them to have like more of a safe space to actually practice their language, speak their language, it might do some wonders.
So I guess my last rapid question is, 22, you're gonna do this for 2 years and you're gonna say French. What's happening next after? I mean, what's 25 to leave doing, or what's your plan, or what you're hoping to do for the rest of your time here in this really all over?
Hopefully by 25, I'll be a lawyer. Hopefully. You never know. But I want to continue to be in Kreyol. So if that means being president again, if that means taking a step back, I want to continue to be in Kreyol because I think that organization there is really an organization that can do some wonders. Been here since 1987. They're going to keep on being here. They're going to still go somewhere, but make more events. That's one thing I really want to do, is make more events for young folks like me, and include more communities that are necessarily not always included in Louisiana. And so hopefully by the time that I'm, say, 46, I'll be governor in Louisiana and be able to do that.
Well, thanks so much for your time. This is only the halfway. This is only halftime because the rest of the time is an open table discussion where we toss the spoon around the rest of the room for people. So yeah, thanks so much for Taalibe for being here. And yeah. I guess let's open it up with the comment, or you could do comments or you could do questions. So for people who haven't been here, it doesn't have to be posed as that. I see your hand. But the first prompt is just, did anything from your own life experience come up from with what Taalibe talked about today? And I'll let you go first. And
specifically, like my husband is sort of from culture. My husband is from down bottom. He's from Golden Net. So most of his family speak French. Like yesterday, we had a family meeting. They all spoke French. I'm from Southern California, so I'm definitely, but I've been in the family for 25 years. All that to say is the education is stressing the French from France versus the Indian French from my dad and body as a babysitter. And I'm saying dad and body for Chef. He has cousins that have only spoken to their children in French, but their father doesn't speak French as well, so he speaks English. So they grew up in a body. They are now 18 to 22. All that to say is they are not stressing or educating education for the different languages of French, the different dialects, the different culture of Haitian French versus French, like the proper, we say it this way, we say, and they're very, very vocal about speaking in the French language. My question specifically is, do you know of any funding for the rural communities to speak and have teachers that know Cajun French? As he had gone to his daughter's school at South Beach High School, said there's many teachers here that are they are from Louisiana in the rural communities. Why don't they teach, or why don't they have funding to teach the language that we actually speak? And he's Native American. It's on the council that it's going to take much time. So all that is, do you know of any funding for the rural communities to have the culture of the Cajun Kreyol? It's awesome. But all that, of any funding for that?
Before I answer that with confidence, I'm gonna point at Dr. Rabelais right there, who is very much well informed in education. Do you know of any funding per se, like specifically funding for that?
So it's a larger question, I think, because you're asking why don't we shut school side? But it's a very complicated question. And I can say that you're correct. And it's been the case really since the beginning that we haven't had the local French on schools. So for example, when we started teaching French again in 1968, there weren't really enough people here that were willing to teach in all those schools. Immersion came a bit later in the early 80s, and it was still the case that the idea was that we would bring the teachers from elsewhere. But it was pretty diverse. There was France and Canada, and Belgium, and other places. While we kind of trained people here about the local teachers that we did. So it wasn't supposed to be a permanent solution. I think everyone agreed that we should have more of local French here. But here we are in 2025, and out of I think 149 immersion teachers, 114 are from France. And it's not even as diverse as it used to be. They're pretty much all French from France. I don't think it's. I don't know exactly what to say, but I mean, at some point we need way more teachers from here to do that. And the question has often been about funding, and I don't know if funding is really the question. Like, who's going to do this? Everyone wants to. Okay. So we already have a teacher shortage. I think we'll why.
Speak Pidgin French or Creole French from down below. Maybe they should take education courses to be able to teach, and then maybe be able to be certified to speak and teach the Creole or the Cajun French. However, the Cajun French, it's not a written language.
Yeah. And so there's another good quote that's the University of Cambridge put out an open source book. It's called Language Revitalization. And there's a quote from Julia Taalibe, who works with Polish language revitalizations. But she says that just because schools were really great at taking language out of communities doesn't mean that they're great at putting it back in. So there's the question of, is education the place where we should be making language strides? But I also want to, coming back to Taaliebe's table, do we have did anything that Taalibe say resonate with anyone else in the room? They want to help them.
I want to say the thing that you said that really blew my mind, if I understood you correctly, is that you have friends who don't recognize your voice in English because you use your French so often. And all of this conversation about how we get original language back, that seems like the most amazing, innovative way to do it. And I really thank you for doing that, because I think that's really quite amazing that you do that. And then that connects to a question is, when people tell you, oh, we don't speak it that way, I think, that might shut down someone, not you, the level of confidence that you might have. But how do you address that person that said that to you? How do you get past that comment that they might make to you?
Well, I usually say you don't speak English like I do. I don't speak English like you do. We're not from the same place. I'm from Bellevue. You're from, I don't know, New Orleans. We're just not from the same place. And so if they come up and say, oh, we don't say that, I'm like, well, you don't say that, but I say that, we say that. So who are you to tell me how I'm supposed to speak? And then I just keep moving on.
Speaking Spanish it's like speaking Spanish, you know, and also multiple languages is very, you know, good. I thought that was a really good way because I mean I don't really practice my own Spanish, in Spanish because of my family and I mean my family spoke like my other family spoke a version of Kreyol as well. So it's just like, you know, and I don't know that French as well as I do Spanish. And having no one to talk to is so isolating because I also speak another language. And that's really hard for me because it's like I'm feeling sometimes the language I just need to do it all the time. Because it's so natural for me to also speak English, but I'm not really cool that we kind of should be on the space that I speak as well. Okay. Another quick comment.
For Wilsey, I just wanted to piggyback on what you asked in reference to the don't be confronted with somebody who tells you that they don't speak same dialect or language. And I've been confronted with that issue as well. But I think the main thing is we can understand one another. So, and that's the beginning conversation or the beginning of understanding one another. Let's see what are the things that are singular as opposed to what is different. Then we can continue the conversation, even have something else in place that will help us to actually learn the language. And that's the only way that you can find out the kinds of languages that exist, kinds of languages actually promote. For example, we have tables that start with French tables, Spanish tables, Kreyol tables. This is one where unfortunately they don't happen as often as we would like to happen, but it's an avenue for promoting the languages.
To echo what Nikki was saying a second ago, I really enjoyed the vision you all have for like the future of Louisiana being a multi-lingual state. And to kind of go to the point about incentivization, I think there are benefits to learning new languages in general, just individually, that helps strengthen your brain, helps strengthen connections in your brain, helps with memory. There's also theories around how different languages allow us to see the world in very different ways. I think we put into that as well. So I think another benefit is that learning a new language can literally put on different things. There are so many benefits. Yeah.
I had a question about Louisiana Kreyol versus Louisiana French. I believe that the Louisiana Kreyol is mostly based on French. Is that correct? What percentage would you say of words, expressions, etc., are the same based on the Louisiana Kreyol?
There's no accurate percentage. Generally, the percentage that gets floated around is about 95% of the same lexicon that Louisiana Creole has, French has. However, when you think about that lexicon, a lot of the words that are used in Louisiana Creole don't mean the same, or they're used differently in Louisiana Creole versus Louisiana French. So when we think about the fact that the lexicon is around 95% to 92% the same, there's a lot of ambiguity in that.
Yeah, that doesn't take into account the grammar and syntax.
Correct.
How did this connection sound? I'm figuring this out, and later that.
Thank you, we got live back to that.
I shouldn't have mentioned that. So I would say that majority of it is mainly from learning at school. Most of those speakers who speak are mainly learning it at school, either at French immersion, either at a predominantly English speaking school. There's some that are learning it from the household, such as myself or some of my friends, but it's mostly from the school system. How it boils down to Hinge is because I don't want to be alone forever. So I ended up going on to Hinge, and in Hinge you actually have a option to where it shows you what languages you speak, and a lot of them do speak. A lot of them put French, and so I get really interested. That's why I still have Hinge. Is I like to click on them and be like, "Hey, tu parles français? Comme tu parles vraiment le français ou pas?" And then they respond back to me, and then that's how we started a conversation in French. But it never goes anywhere.
Else, like, just any, because I know there's a range of ages here. How many other people have used dating apps before in their lifetime? And then who has not? Just
Not yet.
so not yet, okay. Everything's coming out. It's not cheating if they don't recognize your voice, right?
I just want to make a comment. I appreciate what this gentleman said as far as with, someone challenges you as to word choice or stuff, and I think the response is just stay focused on the purpose of language is communication, and if they say, oh, we don't use that word, we'll just say, but you understood me, right? It's right, you know, it's just-
And the differences are probably more beautiful than, why would you object to learning another way of saying something?
Exactly, well, there's close line and all.
Okay, that's the problem. George.
Oh, yeah, no, okay.
And there was some discussion about where is it going in the future and how it's going to go so watered down in Louisiana today, at your present time. And it's hard for the French people to come down and don't find French speakers. And if I remember the history, so we started out in French in Louisiana with NUNUs and then the Spanish and back in French. And we all was left. You know, my wife's family, they're from Mahmoud. And they spoke French with grandparents. That's pretty much all they would speak was French. And I didn't grow up with that. I grew up with like my great grandmother from St. Margaret. She spoke French, and she'd always tell me, you know, I try to talk to her in French, and she said, "Don't say that," that kind of stuff. Because I learned some French in Thibodeau High School. I had a good French teacher. He was Cajun, so he was a real French teacher. So I really learned quite a bit of it. But my point going forward is, we wonder where we are today. It's kind of watered down. And I think because it started, it's a process, because in my lifetime, it's a growth process. In my lifetime, I've seen, you know, South Louisiana, its own country become homogeneous. Because I never heard of chicken and sausage gumbo growing up in New Orleans, right? And so a lot of these Cajuns and Creoles out here did, when the people in New Orleans didn't do. I never heard Sadi played in New Orleans, Louisiana out there, because they didn't have it. But now it's become a homogeneous thing here in the Creole, Cajun Creole culture of Louisiana. People identify that. So I think it's just going to be a growth process that we've all identified it. And even though we speak different patois or dialects or words, whether it's French, Spanish, or whatever, I think it's going to be a growth process. And, as long as we recognize that it's a homogeneous thing and we want to get somewhere, and you've got French immersion and things like that, it's by the time you're done in Louisiana, we'll be back over to, wow, look how big this thing is. You got like a European culture in Louisiana that speaks all these languages, like when you go to Europe, like go to Italy and drive 20 miles and, and speak in French in Nice. So I think we'll get there. It's just a growth process. Might seem flat now, not a lot of French speakers, but I think it's going to continue to grow now to be recognized as a homogeneous thing. It's bigger rate. So it's not as separated as it once was. It's more homogeneous now. That's more common.
Yeah, I trust you. You got this teamwork. Collective. Oh, did you want to comment real quick? Like, do you want to comment?
No, like you could, no, you can like throw it.
I'm not.
No, I was saying like you could throw the spin.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if you had a comment.
So I noticed that there's a lot of references to older generations and a lot of shame around speaking Creole or Louisiana Creole or Louisiana French. My family, my grandparents, my aunts, they spoke Louisiana Creole or Louisiana French. But the younger generation, how do y'all plan to, or do y'all have plans to help older generations move through the shame speaking that language? Like, letting them know that it's okay, that it's not something that should be looked down upon or out of a hierarchy or something like that.
I know I talked to Loli about this on plenty of occasions. And I bother my friends about it every day. One of the things that I see when it comes to actually trying to help the older generation, try to release that shame, is just by trying to force them to speak. Always speaking to them in the language that they should be speaking, that they would have been speaking to you. When I was doing a lot of stuff with La Kreyol show, there was many folks that I would speak to that were older, that when we first start talking, they only talked in English, but then you just add in and keep on speaking in French, to keep on speaking in French. And then sooner or later, they get annoyed with you so much that they just switch the language. But then they get comfortable with you. And it's more of that comfortability that allows them to continue on to speak. And so it's just about making them feel comfortable. Allow them to feel comfortable. Don't basically pressure them too much, but allow that comfortability to happen naturally.
Yeah, I was like, you
I have a 93-year-old mother who lives in Houston, and she's been out there most of her life. I think it's where people here in the parishes have, if there's some elderly folks who speak it, my colleague said you've done waited for it as much as you possibly can. Maybe they will speak with you. They have said in there. My mother said she doesn't want us that children speak through. To her, it may have been, and she's not talking about it, but to her, I believe it was time of her life, maybe it was harsh. Living watching on some plantation, having to do the kinds of work that they did, harsh, and she left it. So it's memories, things that are associated with that, with what you did, and having to speak the language as well. I think we can only abide by what the wishes of them and accept that they are in their own world, and that's what it is. But to associate with them and have programs or events that they can actually attend. See that we're comfortable with it, we still wish and it's okay to speak. That's
so I think kind of going to what you said with that, I think it's creating NUNUs.
the language table to the heritage tables to that. I think more of those, celebrates it in a positive way. It has a way of chipping away at so that is sort of the mama. Today, we can just sort of go that she should speak in public and not letting them know she's sort of. And so we, but now. Seriously, if you give her a mic, you know, you must be like, look, you know, go off and say, that's what it's all right. And, you know, she'll do radio, she'll do, but I think it's like, it's living strictly.
Yeah, the things Mr. Lucius says is really like stir something up in me, because it's a conversation that Taalibe and I have had many times. The conversation that I had with my grandmother. So all four of my grandparents were fluent, either French or Kreyol or both, and now I have one grandparent now. So I put a lot of pressure on her to converse with me and teach me things. When she was the one out of all of them, I think she has the most shame about it. And for her, so she was a teacher, she was an educator for decades. She worked at a therapist office. She's highly educated woman. She had a degree in English, and she lets you know, make joke and make fun of her reading voice that she does. And she's very proper. They're all messing with her about it. But I kind of acted with her one day. The reason why she's like that is because of that shame. She actually saw her and my grandfather only a month apart, but he was a year ahead of her in school. And so I asked her, like, well, how did she end up? Then I thought about it, you know, her family all came from Bayou Tortilla, and I was very fortunate. A lot of them were still alive when I was young, so I got to talk to them. They spoke almost no English. And I think I'm very blessed that I still had relatives who spoke almost no English growing up in this day and age. And so that, you know, her first language was not English. And that was the reason why she ended up a year behind him. And so there was that deep shame, and like you said, creating new memories, but also giving them space to talk about it. Sometimes it is a little bit of a damper on the conversation, like you said. A lot of times they'll talk about it, and it always goes back to those stories about, you know, we weren't supposed to do this, or we were told you should be ashamed. Your country, your this and that. I have a coworker, she's 61, I'm 26, and I'll say things to her in Kreyol because I know she knows it, and she's like, oh girl, you so country. Like it's a negative. And I can laugh it off because of the generation I'm in, but her generation, that was her. You know, you shut up when people told you that because you were embarrassed. So even though sometimes it is a little bit of a damper because we're excited and they're kind of not, I find just giving them the space to release that because it goes deep. It goes into race, it goes into poverty, all of these different things. So just letting them talk, letting them say that, even if, you know, it's kind of sad, and you get a better perspective of where they're coming from. And sometimes they don't even realize it. But just talking about it and getting that validation does help them open up.
That's what it took. I had learning. And that punished but that didn't stop me. I still speak French. All even I try to talk to George, but he wanted even the game. I keep on. If I meet somebody who would say, I understand, speaking French, I start speaking French. I'm not ashamed to do it. That's the only way to comply. Now from down to the line, you probably know. I went to school down there. It was kind of rough and down when you started. Thank you.
People thought say also because of the fact that he was Native American. Some of you may not know that most of his family were not allowed to go to school. And because they were Native American, they were not allowed to go to hospital or the white school. So one of his uncles went to South of Bush and said, I'm going to take you to court so that the Native American children can receive an education. Joe was the first one in his family to be able to go to a white school. That is where he was criticized for going to speak French. We have many relatives still that went to school and only have a fifth or sixth grade education. And because of that, they too will not speak French around. So we are going on a family cruise next week. There are going to be 32 of us. More than half, I would say, understand or speak it fluently. And some of us older cousins will be going with us, and they too will be on the way to the an education was through the Catholic side of schools. And I was so glad that he ended up going through that, going to school, and he's a tugboat captain, retired, fourth generation. So we are having a revival of the younger people. We have cousins who only speak French, as I mentioned earlier. And hopefully they will take up the band, carry on.
Very good.
Non-food versus segregation, like poverty, Negro segregation, and something. Talking about the term of food voting that goes through choosing schools and things like that. But it was not parish active, so some parishes and other some parishes allowed community students only to go to or to not schools. And so a lot of times when that said that to go to school, it could be doing more damage. Because there's some thought of like, are we going to school as something that you would like pass? Go to the great racism.
Getting talked about music and the revitalization. My dad loves seven songs, we laugh a lot. I think that there's other musicians that are singing instruments. Another piece of it.
I mean, the music in itself is actually one of the reasons why I would say that Southwest Louisiana is more open about speaking French versus down the bayou or Southeast Louisiana. It's because this tradition of music, this tradition of singing a la in French or in Creole, singing Cajun in French or in Creole, it's more open. You can't really have a Cajun song and not sing it in French. You can do that in Zydeco. You can have a Zydeco song and not do it in French or in Creole. That somewhat might change soon as more artists are starting to pick up French and Creole again and put it in their songs. But yeah, the music is one of the reasons why a lot of the young folks still speak to this day. And there's a lot of young folks who learn how to speak just by listening to the music, just by learning the music, learning how to play the music. Several of them, such as what's her name? I know Nathan, Dr. Nathan Raveley, he knows her. Fontenot, what's her? Jamie Lynn Fontenot. She's one of the perfect examples of that.
This is going to be the last comments before we turn off the mic. Let's keep on talking, but I'm just stop passing the spoon.
Just wanted to kind of piggyback on something that I was Arabian on so long at KRBS, and Pete Bezer on and I was I said he would have came the and from one comment he made to me, he says, I will not play any music that doesn't have the French lyrics. And he said, if they don't speak, if they don't sing in the language, I'm not going to play. And for us, with Zydeco, we did not have that where maybe a lot of the tunes were written in French or in Cajun French, because we didn't have anybody teaching. That was exactly on my part of Creole. We did not continue. And there were outlets that sometimes if the musician wanted to, I may have availed myself to, but that would not So a lot of the songs that you hear are designed for the lot of English. But little by little, as Taalibe said, we hope that the musicians would want to learn, we bring it over to them to actually transcribe those or even have or side by side as they are writing the song. But at that particular time, that's way back when they were interested. It was easier just to crank up a tune and do it in English. But there's some differences. Thank you.
You had to go through this? Yeah, if you have last spot, this is the last spot. Go for it.
Okay, I say feedback on that, then once we turn this off, we can like really get into it, because we brought up, the things with like being indigenous or black or whatever. Can really get into that conversation of why we're seeing this revitalization amongst the youth and why it is more unified. And like you said about being homogenous, because you had all these isolated groups of people, right? That were New Orleans over here, where you got the people in the prairies, people down the bayous, you have all these different dialects and different experiences. And now you have people coming together under that banner, like it says Louisianaise. So we want to make it under, this French banner. It's not necessarily about French identity, it's that it is this common ground for us. With an indigenous background, black, white, Haitian, Kreyol, New Orleans, city, country, whatever. And that plays into it as well, because there was an extra layer of not wanting to speak certain languages if you were a certain color. Because you were already labeled as probably being ignorant, uneducated, whatever. So then on top of that, you don't speak English, big problems, big shame. Big shame. I couldn't have ended it better. What is that in French? But man, thank you guys all so much. I couldn't have ended it better. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you so much. And please continue to talk. Check out the QR codes and the pictures. Taalibe can talk you a little bit through what pictures he has on there. The QR code is Michael McGrath, who is a scholar, a Haitian Kreyol linguist at MIT. And that's a lecture that he gave a TED Talk in 2023, I believe, about the connection between language and social consciousness. Thank you guys. Please continue to talk. Get some more gumbo. We'll turn on some music and start line dancing again.